I think the thing about, insights very often is the fact that to answer a specific question, you need to have a general worldview. In a world where you are running out of things to believe in, the strange thing is that in a certain sense, the market has the chance to be more authentic. It is, in a sense, it is easier to believe in advertising today than it is to believe in journalism. Interest in creativity is not going to go away. What we call creative will change. What we value will change. Right. The essence of motorcycle and the essence of Royal Enfield is the feeling that the body has. When you sit on it, there is you feel the riding through your body. You rediscover the primal force of the body and the sensations of the body. My belief is that consumption is going to be the largest profession in the world. All the influencers are professional consumers. They're consuming so that we can consume. Mm-hmm. Right. They're telling us how to consume in a variety of ways. All creative energy is coming from independent sources, from individuals. It is coming on TikTok when it was there. It is coming on Reels. It is coming on YouTube. It is coming on nothing from advertising. Nothing from advertising. And here we are so-called creative industry. We are paid to be creative. And we are doing chicken shit. The thing is that I wake up every morning with a C-grade Hindi film song in my head. This is a generation that needs to invent concepts before living them. It has to, the idea of identity you have to invent before having an identity. What is identity in today's age? Right. What is a good career in today's age? That is, I knew what a good career was. Everybody knew what a good career was. Whether you could get it or I knew that doing an MBA from IIM Ahmedabad was very good. The mobile phone fundamentally tells us that you are important. Because in an earlier time, when you had a phone at home, people called the place. Now they call the person. Every mobile phone is like a story, a novel, which is of my relationship with the universe. It's a journal. Technology has successively, it says the gap between what you want and what you can have, I will continue to narrow. Your mind wants things, your body can't have them. I will keep narrowing. Now we are getting to a point where with AI, the mind actually can reside outside the body. And if we first made a body redundant, now we are making a mind redundant.
What's a lesson that took you a long time to learn?
Nothing really matters.
Hello, fellows. Welcome to the next episode of Jagged with Jasravi. Subscribe to my channel for conversations at the edge with thought leaders from the branding, marketing, and the business world. Conversations that ignite new ideas. Ideas with rough and sharp edges. Hello, Santosh. Welcome to my show.
Yeah, hi, Jasravi. Very pleasure to be here.
Today, we have a guest who needs no introduction. We are going to skip that part totally. And
for the first time, has someone said this, that somebody needs no introduction and actually skipped this part? Because otherwise, this is a precursor to say, this person needs no introduction, but here's an introduction which is 5 minutes long. So I mean, thank you.
I was reading this book, the Tanishq story, and there was this one chapter where you and the process you took up was mentioned, and I said, okay, this is an interesting coincidence that we'll hear it from you. So most of us would not know. I didn't know because I've not worked on the brand, Santosh, that. And this is for my audience, that it was originally meant to be Tiffany of the East for the European market. And it was mostly 18-karat jewelry. And the idea was that, we are introducing Indians to a luxurious experience and, trinkets and modern jewelry. So you come into the picture and everything changes. And of course, you'll tell us what was that. But how did you look at the challenge, Santosh? Where all did you travel to in terms of your mind and your process that we got the solution we did?
So just to add a little more flesh to what you said about Tanishq, it is true that when they came into the market, it was with a very European perspective. very design centric, and therefore they came in with 18 karat gold. In India, 18 karat gold, unfortunately, is pretty much like Petal. It has no value. So, I mean, nobody takes that seriously. So they changed that. Actually, before we got involved, they had already changed that. They had already got into 22 karat gold. They had also had some measure of success by positioning themselves as being, verifiable and trustworthy. They started something called a keratometer, which, kind of allowed people to check whether their gold was real or not, and found to their horror that a lot of their old jewelers had been ripping them off. So there was some work that had been done. And when we came on, where they were was that, they were doing well. They were a well-regarded brand, but they were being bought as trinkets. They were being bought, low value, high image kind of a quadrant that they were stuck in. And when we looked at it, we found that what was interesting was the fact that a lot of it had to do with their own imagination of jewelry and the role that they were playing. They thought of jewelry essentially as being fashion, and internally the designers that they had were all very, very, global in their mindset, and therefore they kind of did not they actually looked down on wedding jewelry as chunky and somewhat, infra-dig to kind of, so they had to, it was like a burden that over every wedding season we have to come up with a collection. And because, we are this very rarefied brand. Even their advertising, for instance, they had ads that actually had African American women, wearing jewelry. They had, so it was presented as a fashion brand, as a couture brand. It was not presented, imagined as a jewelry brand. And so when we came in, fundamentally, I mean, we followed a process which was, where we actually opened up, which is a typical idea that, we think of a brand as a junction of meaning, and that meaning comes from several sources. So we look at each source of meaning, dig down into each source of meaning. So what is the meaning of jewelry? What is the idea of jewelry? What does that represent? What is the meaning of gold? What does that represent in our culture? So there's a cultural reading. Mythologically, where do we come from? So we had Devdutt Pattanaik also, who was consulting on the brand. Semiotically, where does it come from? So we had a semiotician, Seema Khanbalkar, working with us on that. We did a study of retail, also reading retail, not just looking at, but instead of what is the meaning of retail. So, for instance, we found that traditional jewelers in India thought of, jewelry through the fertility code. It was abundance. So when you go in, you are surrounded by a sense of prosperity and abundance. Whereas Tanishq looked at it through a sort of a fashion code. So every individual product was given space, but it was sparse, it was minimalistic, it was, and so it was a totally different reading of the idea of jewelry, and coming from a completely different place. So it was fundamentally what we were doing was to try and open up the all the sources, that were flowing into the brand, and then ask ourselves as to, underlying all this, what is the mental model that is at work? And so the mental model of fashion, we thought, was an extremely limiting one. Culturally, in India, jewelry is not fashion, it is culture. That was fundamentally the very simple kind of an insight, saying, and you are wrongly located in the quadrant of culture or fashion, because that is a very tiny aspect of jewelry. So therefore, we said, yet you are Tanishq. You are not a traditional jeweler. So you cannot simply be representing the idea of tradition and what jewelry means in the past. So therefore, the idea that came up was the idea of revitalizing tradition. And we said, you must actually be the repository of all traditions, jewelry traditions in India. You are at that time, the only national brand. You take on the responsibility of saying that I understand jewelry and the Indian traditions better than anybody else, but I don't merely echo them, I revitalize them. I give them, there is a Tanishq take on jewelry. So therefore, and you participate in, say, any Bollywood historical, you should be the source of jewelry. And that's what actually started happening. Jodha Akbar, they were there. A whole lot of films they started doing. So it changed. So it was not just, about advertising. They did this new campaign called, New Tales of Tradition, which became, and in a sense, although that tagline has gone, that idea that, they revitalize tradition is something you see till today. Whether it's the remarriage ad, where again, the idea is you take a tradition, but you revitalize it. You find the essence of tradition, but you present it. So it's very respectful of tradition. But it is also not afraid to reinterpret tradition. So there's that communication in terms of the internal kind of designing and product that absolutely changed to embracing tradition, embracing the mainstream of jewelry, but not being afraid to reinterpret it rather than running away from it and kind of characterizing it as being as not worth your time. And so therefore internally it took a lot of change in terms of the retail spaces, which is takes much longer to change. Again, the imaginations change. So in a sense, it became a transformational shift that the organization made based on a different reading of the meaning of jewelry.
So, Santosh, when you said it was a simple insight, it's it's only looking back that and I guess that's a litmus test also, because looking back, it should seem so simple.
So that is by classic definition of an insight, that it is retrospectively self-evident.
Yeah.
Once you see it, you say, oh yeah, of course. I mean,
but it wasn't to a lot of people. Nobody knew that this possibility existed. And one of the people that it was mentioned in the book, you also consulted a jewelry historian.
Yes, Usha Balakrishnan.
Usha Balakrishna. So, you did not leave any aspect to say that, okay, what is the relationship consumer has with jewelry and what it means? So, like you were saying, it's an emotion. And when you come to wedding, I mean, it's like Indian wedding. I mean, it's like bhari emotion. Then it's a memory. It's a legacy. It's, like in India, it was, like you said, culture. It's Stridhan also. So, that so much data and so much, ways to access what it means to the consumer. So when you're looking at all of this, and it's a gift as well, and it's a science and it's an art. So, but because today we are so much into data, and nobody is really looking at the wisdom of what it translates to, how it distills. So if you could go a little deeper into, was there any moment, that you felt that, oh my God, this is, we've completely missed it, or the brand has missed it? You have been quoted in the book as that Santosh said, wedding is the heart of the jewelry market, and you are behaving like an outsider. You have to get in, but with your own take. So, I mean, that's another amazing thing that you do, that, when you put it into words, it's like, oh my God, it just stays as a mantra in the head as well.
So this idea that, that which is a larger, so I'll have to answer this in a slightly, I'll move back a little and then come closer to this. I think the thing about, insights very often is the fact that to answer a specific question, you need to have a general worldview. So for instance, what you're talking about, the inside outside, was coming from all our other work on India, which we said that in India, insiders have the right to change things, not outsiders. So if you want to change something, you have to be an insider. India is receptive to change within the culture, but the change happens in a particular way, and so therefore, and that did not come from the Tanishq study, that came from a body of work before that. But it allows us to see what is at work here. The fact that you are an outsider, you have decided to be this external body looking on the jewelry market with a little bit of disdain, and you're kind of looking down and saying, this is not really and therefore you're operating on the fringes because you haven't earned the right to be working in the mainstream, because you haven't belonged. So belonging is a prerequisite for changing things. So, but this comes from somewhere else, right? And that's the thing about, this specifically here. Was there a moment? I don't think there was a moment. I think even before we got into the project, there was a sense that one had, and I was actually part of an amazing team, and all of them were actually were very, very active kind of players in this. But it was there was a sense that we are absolutely in the wrong place. To put our fingers in a pithy sense on what it was something that was a process, and it kind of evolved organically. But the fact that we are in the wrong place is something that we had a sense even before we started the project. And I think the thing about looking at all avenues and looking at and opening out the problem essentially is that you get different. So that's the thing about data. Data gives you confidence in a linear sense, right? Whereas this kind of a process gives you confidence in a horizontal sense. When you walk through the historian and you see a resonance that is the same as the semiotic study, which is same as the mythological study, which is the same as what you see in retail. So it is more about resonance than it is about deduction. It is more about finding patterns that you see across very different kind of an areas, and then discerning as to, okay, so what is unifying about that, rather than if X, therefore Y. It doesn't follow that process. So I think it's a different process of logic, but it has its same sense of rigor about it. And I think that is what happened here. It kind of just came together when we looked at all these individual elements. All of them seem to lead to the same place. And I think that is really what. But there wasn't a moment as such in this case that I can point to.
Okay, absolutely. And so you're saying there was a dialogue between a lot of data sources, a lot of patterns, and horizontally, you look at everything that is constituting and contributing to that rapport with the category. And we will get to how India changes and etc. And maybe it's more, even more so for India. I don't know, that you have to look at the horizontal picture because of how we are, I mean, complex and so many contradictions, etc. But that's for later. We are getting into more brands. So Saffola, I mean, at that point in time, it was like a case study that everybody had to talk about. Everybody, was amazed at what happened, how it completely transformed in the healthcare. What do you remember? What do you want to talk about? Its problem, its challenge, and what was the big insight, in how we looked at heart health?
The interesting thing about Saffola was that actually it was a very brave brand before we took it on. It was a very brave brand in the sense that I have never seen a brand that had done more terrifying advertising in my own life. I don't know if you remember, this is, before your time, I'm sure, but the original advertising for Saffola used to be about a man having a heart attack. Right. And the brand kind of a signature was the ECG beep beep beep, and the fact that here's somebody on deathbed,
Ambulance.
ambulance and that. So I mean, I have never seen advertising, like that for a food product, right? There's a man having his child's birthday, collapses, ambulance comes, a T happens, and the sound of the ECG. It's a terrifying commercial. It is a terrifying, and to take on that. And it was, I mean, their task was the fact that, we are a very high price. They were significantly higher priced than the other oils. And how do you justify that price premium? They had an ingredient, which was, safflower, which they argued was significantly better. And therefore, there was the price. And how do you justify the price? By amping up the problem you're solving. So you're saying this is, but the problem that happened with it was that the fact that you got, kind of slotted as being for serious heart patients. So unless you were on your deathbed, it really made no sense. And eventually, I mean, the fact of the matter is that people like that would unfortunately die. And so, you were left with a crumbling base, so that people keep popping it because that's what you were kind of, showing in your advertising. So therefore, I mean, it was a strong position. Now, the challenge was, how do you could always do, there were a lot of brands doing fluffy health, families, playing frisbee and, general good health. The problem with that is that that could not justify a price premium. And it is just very, very kind of airy, fluffy territory. The idea of health as a general feel good kind of an idea. So we needed something that had some sharp edges, that had a strong reason why you would want to upgrade, and yet was not terrifying. And also had an audience that was larger than people who were, just about, going to sort of drop off and kick the bucket. So that was really the we had to find that, right? So I think one of the things that the insight that came here was the fact that, and it came from simple observation. There is a time, and particularly because I think there was a time when I think, I was I think some people in my team also were going through that life phase where suddenly things start going south, figuratively and literally, meaning, and and so it kind of, where you take the lift instead of taking the stairs. There is a certain moment, where you realize that youth is not eternal, and that there is a curve, right? And eventually, things curve downwards, right? So you face that, right? And that idea, that awareness of mortality. But the interesting thing is that when we become aware of mortality, we we don't panic. We kind of joke about it, and we try and dismiss it as being insignificant. We try and avoid it. We evade conversations about it. I know I should cut back my drinking. I know I should not smoke so much. I know I should start exercising, but I actually don't. And there is a period of resistance. It's only after you reach a certain age that you actually either get very serious about it or just decide, to give up. So I mean, but there is a very distinct kind of a pattern in the when we first become aware and can tangibly feel mortality. So we call this idea mortality games. The games we play with our own mortality. The idea and what happens there is Safola will say, oh, you can play your little games with mortality, but at least get yourself insurance. The smart thing to do is to play your little games till you become serious. So the husband plays the game and the wife becomes the sort of a serious, and which is true. The worried frown on the wife's face and the constant policing and monitoring of the husband is a pattern that you will see till today. I mean, it is a recurring pattern in home. So it came from a very real life observation of a phenomenon which is serious, and yet it is dealt with in a somewhat frivolous way. And so therefore that became the idea. So the first commercial was that came was they taken on the song from Dil Se, and it was kal se re. So it was the procrastination that happens typically. Can be kal se karunga, kal se karunga. So a husband takes off for a run in the morning, but the wife catches him eating chaat. The treadmill becomes a clothes hanger, etc. The usual things that you see, and that continued for many years. The other one was Abhi to main jawan hu, and so on. So for about 6 or 7 years, there were different slices of this insight. The idea of the denial that we go through of mortality, and what that did is that it freed up the brand, from its very, very grim kind of and a very narrow space into a much wider, much more. It is much easier to accept the story of your mortality when you see it presented in a way that is not threatening. And it still kept up its price premium. It was still hard edged, but it was not a depressing message. So I think it managed the balance of being serious enough at its core to warrant having a solution that is more expensive, and yet accessible enough for people to be able to embrace that and say, yeah, that's me. I'm going through that. It's possible for people to say, both for the husband and the wife, to say, yeah, that's who we are. So that recognition of seeing yourself reflected in the need for the brand, I think, is a very important kind of part. And I think Safola managed to do that.
Santosh, this whole thing of breathlessness as a symbol for you got to take care, because a lot of times, because of the denial and the coping mechanism of, let me laugh it off and not think
Right.
about it, because it makes you so afraid. It's so
Right.
difficult to deal with it. You gave it a symptom that can be something that you look into, that, the husband is breathless. That means something needs to start happening. And from what I remember, Santosh, the brand had become a symbol, because every time you saw it in a, basket in the shopping area, it was a symbol of those people who, were willing to invest in long-term healthcare. They were proactive about it. And also, it became a part of good identity, a healthy relationship to heart health and health. And how the wife became the pioneer and in taking this change. So many things about it. So beautiful. So let's talk about a different category now. Lenskart, they're all very different brands. They're all very different aspects of being human.
So the Lenskart story is actually, it came from the fact that here's a category that was has been, had been stuck in a certain kind of a implicit meaning that everybody associated with it. And we come from a time when historically growing up, having spectacles was a pain, right? It was, and you were also branded chashmish and chokha and four eyes, तो वहाँ हमारे वहाँ वो the idea of chashma pehno, meaning it was not something that was certainly, it was, I mean, in the old films when Jitendra had to be cast as serious, he had to have this big thick black chashma और मूंछ लगा दिए वो तो सीरियस बन गया, मीनिंग इट वाज दैट कि भाई ये तो गोंचू बन गया, फ्रॉम बीइंग दिस जंपिंग जैक जीतू to a somber school teacher required spectacles, a very simple kind of a logic.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it was that, and you had chemists that you went to, and no, not chemists, opticians that you went to, and every city had its own kind of opticians who were well regarded. There is a clinical environment. You go there, you buy. It was a grudge purchase. टूट गए तो you are cursing yourself कि क्या करना है इसका, and you go in. So it was a straightforward thing, and that is what. So even Titan had actually come in earlier, and they. That's a separate story because we also worked on Titan Eye Care, but it's a separate story. But they actually went the sort of a traditional way of saying precision science, etc. So here comes Lenskart, which was to begin with an online. First, only a digital only, and then it became digital plus physical. But initially, it was digital only. So here they come in. They have an advantage that, because they were digital, they have a long tail product. They can pretty much source anything. Everything is available. They don't have the limitation of having to display their entire inventory. So there is they have that advantage. They have the disadvantage of saying, of how do you deliver, how do you, people want to do an eye test or they want to, check out. So they solved for that in the initial days, where there was actually this guy who lugged an entire kind of a testing thing, and they came to your house and they actually tested it. So that was in terms of trying to, but as a brand, when we were thinking about it, it seemed to us, we did this observation study. Apart from the usual thing we do, we looked at the meaning of spectacles, identity, and the role of spectacles in defining identity. We looked at retail, we looked at, so we did an observation. Actually, you don't even need an observation study because you know this. But we did an observation study, and it was very clear that there were two like almost divergent axes on which the category worked. It apparently worked as a vision correction, clinical, optician-based category where everybody was, which was very serious and that. And on the other axis, it worked purely as a cosmetic category. Because most people at a shop showed zero interest in के lens कैसा है, zero interest. The only interest they showed is कि ये कैसे दिखता है, ये कैसे दिखता है, ये कैसे दिखता है. That day the only interest, you are just trying out versions of yourself, and you are saying how does this look, and the fact is that the nature of your specs can make you look completely different. So that's one axis, right? One inquiry. The other inquiry is almost like a whole identity inquiry on saying, there was a time when our identity was all, we aspired to fixed identities. So to give a very crude but, simple example is that if you were to look at Hindi film stars, men in their earlier kind of films, everybody had the same look in all their films. Amitabh Bachchan hairstyle was Amitabh Bachchan hairstyle. That, high hairstyle parting in the center was Amitabh Bachchan hairstyle. His name also was the same, Vijay, in so many films. Meaning there was that sense of creating a persona and sticking to it. Similarly, you look at Shammi Kapoor hairstyle, it is the same. Most, people would have a fixed persona. And that would crystallize and that would be used over a period of time. Whereas if you were to look at identity today, it's so much more fluid. Like, an Amir Khan will unveil his look for the next. A Ranbir Kapoor in Animal versus a Ranbir Kapoor in Wake Up Sid, or whatever, I think it was Wake Up Sid. In one of these films, completely different. Completely different. Right? It's not just that. I mean, we see that, this idea of an identity that is fluid, that keeps changing, which is not fixed, where we don't want to fix ourselves to a certain point. We want to keep experimenting with who we are. Whether it is the reason why we keep changing the DP on social media all the time. You're always trying to find that version of ourselves. It's almost like we are beta testing ourselves, by saying this or this or this or this. So it's and that's what we said, this idea. Here you are a brand that has an infinite amount of choice. because of the way you are structured. Here you have a consumer need at a meta level or at a macro level, which is about the search for different versions of the self. And your shopping actually is looking for, even earlier was looking at how do I look. So this idea that you are not a vision correction brand, fundamentally, you are, meaning, but your core idea is identity exploration. You're an identity exploration brand. It is about saying, and so you can have many spectacles. You don't need to have only one, because who are you today? Who do you want to be today? And so that was even the logo was changed to an infinity sign, which was about representing the multiplicity of chai. So it started from there, and that's where the brand got created. The idea that and so the launch commercial also was that this person sort of trying out different looks and getting different reactions, and that was the launch, and that became the idea for the brand, fundamentally thinking of the category in new terms.
So what would you say, that the consumer was ready for something like this, and at the right time the insight got harnessed, or there was enough sign of it, the consumer was already doing it, but no brand had actually seen that gap?
I think that's a fairer description, that the latter. I think this was something the consumer was already doing and had been doing for a while. But it's almost like our preconceived definitions of what we are about, who we are, and what we are about is so strong. And also, what happens is that because it gets established in a certain way, the idea of doing anything fresh or anything new seems, like a risk. And that is the reason. The truth is that with Titan Eyewear, it was an earlier time, but we had suggested a similar sort of on the same axis, and they were not ready to commit to that. They were not ready to buy that, right? And we said, you're a fashion brand, you're not a clinical brand, right? So it's, and I understand why. I mean, it's not, it's a call. At that time, it was a risk. This is an online brand, there is fundamentally much more risk taking. Fundamentally, a young entrepreneur, out of nowhere with nothing to lose. But it's a fundamentally, I mean, you can't evaluate, brand organizations on narrow terms. You have to look at the ecological reality of every organization. And the ecological reality of Lenskart was the fact that it was open to trying new things. It was very, very Piyush is this amazingly kind of a, he's somebody who really backs an idea or really goes for it. He doesn't do things by half measures. And there's a huge amount of energy, enthusiasm, and drive. And so, it just helped to have that working for you. But it was something that was already happening. Consumers had already imagined this category in a new way. It's just that, nobody noticed.
Yeah, it got owned in such a beautiful way. And that's a very important thing that you're saying, that the DNA of the brand, the DNA of the organization and the founder and the startup energy, I mean, all of that came together. And, that's
I just like to underline that a bit. Very often what happens is that when we talk about brands, and because a lot of people, and I have also come from the advertising industry, we tend to locate it in a very narrow sphere in terms of advertising, in terms of communication, in terms of what do we say. I think the power of insight is much deeper than that. It is transformational at an organizational level. And unless there is that ambition, and there is that worldview, and unless there is that framework to say brands are not the face of the organization, brands are the heart of the organization. Fundamentally, that you are not the way an organization presents itself. It's the way an organization imagines itself. And that's a fundamental difference in terms of, the role of brands. And I think it's very important, because if it imagines itself, if Titan imagines itself as Tanishq imagines itself as being inside the culture and doing, and revitalizing it, it changes everything. Who you hire, everything it changes. It is not about your next campaign. And I think, this is something that I do feel that not just with the creative side or the agency side, even at the client side, the recognition that brands are as central to their business as they really are, I think often comes late, if it comes at all.
Brand is the heart. Brand is the heart, and that is what's going to fuel everything, and that's how and how beautifully it's pumping, is how vital you are going to be for the culture. Like you always say, that it's going to be culturally relevant or culturally relevant. And if the brand, which is the heart, is culturally relevant, it's going to be alive and happening, and it's going to be in people's consciousness and thoughts, and they'll think of buying it also. And now again, there's another brand which is actually what you just said, the brand, the company, it's all one, which is Royal Enfield. Everything that they do is basis the DNA that they defined for themselves. Dug, 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 down. Yeah, like on a different journey. And that's the power, Santosh. I can just see it going on a highway, scenery here and just all by oneself. Yeah.
It's an amazing brand, actually. So the thing about Royal Enfield was that, they came to us at a time and they had already started doing well, actually. So it's not, they were doing well. And it was already amazing, because in a sense, there was this old bullet, right? And ye bullet meri jaan, manzilon ka nishan, meaning very rustic, very powerful, it was a cult even then. There was something very powerful and something very real about the bullet, but it was cast in a certain, it was put in a certain quadrant, and that was also the time when that kind of a machismo was actually seen in a certain way, in a class way. Machismo actually came in a lower, it was relegated to a lower space, right? Similarly, the macho cigarette brands were all the cheaper brands. As you moved above a certain price point, they were all very refined and all, so it is very interesting, how that culturally that we kind of made that distinction. But when they came to us, and in a sense, the job was to articulate what the brand was fundamentally about. The job was also to create a future template, in a sense of saying, okay, so where do we move in terms of product? Where do we move in terms of presenting ourselves to the world, and to the world literally, because they were going international. So what is there an idea that actually has legs globally? Is there what is it about the brand that actually is at the heart of the brand, which we can then leverage? And the interesting thing there was that, again, it's an organizational thing. This is an organization that I think is quite an amazing organization in so many ways. And under Siddharth Lal, it has actually, there is something very interesting happening there. For instance, they refer to their consumers as riders, never as buyers. Distinction, but it's so telling, right? You are not interested in the person only when they buy. You're interested in their use of your product, right? You see them in a much larger sense then. And so therefore, I mean, there's something special about that organization. But I think that for us, actually, the insight was lay outside the realm of motorcycles. I mean, yes, there was a lot to digest with Royal Enfield. They had that unique sound. They were not a tearaway. They didn't offer tearaway speed. They offered cruising. There was a certain, stateliness. There was a certain calm self-assurance about the brand. You sat sat up yeah, and you walked, tuck, 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 you went in us. There was no hurry. There was no chichorapan. There is no sort of that little trying to prove anything to anybody, trying to sort of nothing. You kind of owned the road and you knew it, and you didn't want to make a big deal about it, right? There was that sense about it, and we also saw that people who bought the Enfield they came from different walks of life, but there was an attachment and a certain identification. It was so strong, with that people have with the bike. And we said, okay, going forward, I mean, what is the source of this appeal? So obviously there is some masculine kind of it is drawing into and tapping into something which is a core masculine self-belief. So clearly there was this sense of how men want to see themselves, strong, reliable, and there is that whole very, very strong, silent kind of an archetype. There is that one part of it. But going forward, masculinity codes keep changing, right? So I mean, so you need, what goes beyond something like that, that is deeper and that is more durable. And we said that in a world today, what we are seeing is that actually, if you were to look at the body and what has happened to the body, right? Our bodies are starting becoming ornamental or recreational. There was a time when our bodies were the only machine we had, and we did everything with our body. Even now in India, there are women who will walk, 6 hours a day to collect firewood or water, right? Their bodies are, there are still, for so many people, when you're farming and you're using your own body instead of mechanization, the body is a machine. That is your central asset that you have. But for most of us, our bodies have become redundant, right? They are vestigial organs. We have to take our body for a walk. That's what we do. When we go for a walk, what are we doing? We kind of, are pushing up the body and saying, chal tu thoda, otherwise you're rotting. We work out because we don't work. Because bodies don't work, we have to work out. We have to lift weights because we are not lifting weights in real life. We are doing ridiculous things, right? So that this machine is kept in running condition. Because otherwise it would rot, sitting as we do in our sedentary lives, right? So here is and we are losing touch. And what is happening? The other thing that is happening is that we are moving from analog technology to digital technology. Analog technology, if you think about it, is actually where technology imitates and is a replica of the human body in some ways. What I mean by that is that there is a certain, take a fan regulator. If you want to make it faster, you go one tuck, 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 right? The physical gesture mimics the fan's picking up speed. The more you go here, the more speed it goes, right? A detonator, you plunge, the bomb goes, right? Mechanical, the motorcycle itself is like the entrails of a human being, right? Which is what, if you look at the Royal Enfield, is that it's all exposed. It's like mechanical objects always had a relationship with the human body, even when they were machines. Digital objects have no relationship with the human body. When I press this button, I could be opening a bathroom door. I could be switching off my phone. I could be blowing up the world. You can't make out, right? There is no relationship between action and consequence. We are detached increasingly from the consequences of our actions. Our bodies do not feel the consequences of what we do. The essence of motorcycle and the essence of Royal Enfield is the feeling that the body has. When you sit on it, there is you feel the riding through your body. You rediscover the primal force of the body and the sensations of the body. And that is such a basic primal feeling. It is such a powerful primal feeling. The idea that you are alive, and that's what it means to be alive, right? And I think that is what, was the key to Royal Enfield, what we call pure motorcycling. It's a simple phrase, but the idea that something that was essential, that you needed to rediscover in a world where the most used part of your body is the fingertip. That's the most used part of our bodies. You need it, and here you feel a full body sensation that you feel. We felt that was a technology would only isolate us more and more from the physical world, and therefore a brand that rediscovered the power of the physical world and the power of the machine and was located there was something that was global, that had legs, that went beyond masculinity as an idea and had something more fundamental than that. And that became the basis for saying, okay, what kind of products should we create? So the Himalayan, which is a particular kind of a physical experience. And so that became the axis. If you look at the stores, they became the machine kind of a deconstructed, very, very much a glorification. The idea of what we called, so we called their design ethos, we called it naked essentialism. The idea that, all that is essential, but naked. And the idea of machine love was the other phrase that we used to create this relationship between riders and the bike. And then the whole sort of the retail store became like the showcase for the brand, which highlighted the idea of machine love. So that was really the Royal Enfield story.
And after this, I'm going to call up my brother. He's in Melbourne. And I think every family has this story, Santosh, wherein there is just like you said, there used to be bullets that point in time. Right. He's elder to me and, like he's a Sardar, right? So he's much taller and all. And he said, I'm not going to go for any other bike. He rebelled for one entire year. He went to college, and that was some distance on a bicycle. He said, I'm not going to go and buy anything else till I get my bullet. We just like, when we are talking, he was just talking about this fact that Ravi, it becomes part of you. You feel like it's a part of you, and that whole thing you so beautifully described, that the analog and the digital, and how what our body is getting reduced to. Santosh, I remember my dad used to joke that these women will go to gym and do exactly what they do when they put clothes on the wires. So, and they want to do that when they go and do that.
Exactly.
This is exactly what's happening, and that's another section we will get into. But
so your dad was before his time. You should have been in insights.
Yeah, he used to say I'm basically a poet. So that
makes sense.
yeah. I know your daughter. You have two daughters,
Right.
And they're both Gen Z.
Actually, the older one is the millennial, and the younger one is just on the cusp. She sort of, I think, on the given day, she is either a millennial or a Gen Z. So.
Yeah, I think Gen Z is a mindset. I think some bit we also are. So, when you say Gen Z is a cultural disruption, and I was working on a brand, JBL. So my client kept saying that whatever you guys are saying, I mean, we also were like that when we were young. I mean, what's the big deal? I mean, why is so much noise about Gen Z is separate, Gen Z is separate? And I thought about it, and I realized, and I want you to talk about why you say it's a disruption and what it can mean for our society going forward, because we're looking at change in every possible way. This is the first generation who was born with infinite possibilities of a digital world, and the parents only did not pass on the values.
Absolutely.
The values were being chosen by them subconsciously from the world. And in that sense, we see the fusion that has been happening so strong. Somewhere they are individualistic, somewhere they're very collaborative, somewhere they want security, somewhere they don't want to be held back, and hence paradox. And a lot of times when the earlier generations look at them from their own lens, they're like, इनको तो ये नहीं है, उनको तो ये नहीं है, हमारे ज़माने में, all that happens. So it's but they are the ones who really care. They really care about change and sustainability and how the world needs to be better. And they're angry, with how we've left the world and the earlier generations. What is your sense? What do you feel? Do you feel positive about this generation? Do you feel this is the generation that's required for, where the world is headed and what we need to make of it?
Yeah, so I'm let's say, empathetic towards the generation. I certainly don't have a negative view of the generation. I think, I in fact think that this generation faces a huge challenge. I think it's a very difficult time to be young, and I think, so I think it's very important to acknowledge that. It's very important to understand and acknowledge the fact that they're dealing with an unprecedented amount of exposure and the idea of being pulled in different directions, and it is very, very difficult. I think it's very difficult for them. I think it's very important for older generations to have a measure of empathy and to understand where they're coming from instead of sitting on judgment, because I think that's, to me, that serves no purpose. In life in general, it serves no purpose, and specifically here it is of no use. And I think it is very important, if you want to understand today and you want to understand tomorrow, you can see it through their lives. You can understand what is happening in a larger sense by looking at Gen Z and trying to understand what they're struggling with, what they're dealing with. I think, like you said, this is the first generation that is born. I'll just take a minor detour before coming back to this. I am, in general, I'm not a great fan. I have never been a great fan of these characterizations, Gen Z, these labels. Because in an earlier time, it was baby boomers. The baby boomers is utterly meaningless in India. Kahan baby boomer? What World War? Uske baad, I mean, what are we talking about? It has zero relationship, right? So because if a cohort is defined with respect to a context that is not universal, then the cohort definition itself becomes meaningless, right? So all these definitions were meaningless till such time as they became based on technology and exposure to technology, because technology is a global force. And therefore, I think for now, I think the idea, even millennials, I think as a characterization made sense, Gen Z makes sense, Alpha, whatever is to come. I think because fundamentally we are the biggest force in our world today is technology. We are all responding to technology, whether we are Gen baby boomers or whatever we are still responding to technology, right? All of us are in that sense, infants in various ways with our own context, responding to technology. So in this context, I think the characterization of, you look at Gen Z, they come into a world where there are no rules. All rules have changed. The idea of work has changed. The idea of money has changed. The idea of age has changed. There are 19-year-old billionaires, right? The idea of relationships have changed. The idea of what is true and what is false has changed. The idea of expertise has changed. The idea of parenting has changed, right? Here you are world in a liquid world, where everything is changed. What do you hang on to? What are the certitudes in your life? And you're exposed to everything at a phenomenally early age, right? You are, and on top of that, everybody is a broadcaster. So you're not just receiving the world. You have to broadcast yourself. Who are you? You don't know who you are. What do you broadcast? Right. And on a daily basis, you have to find a new version for yourself that is appealing, because there are people judging you on a daily, hourly basis. So, I mean, actually, you think about it, it's a terrifying situation. Yes, you have loads of opportunities. Yes, you have great exposure. A lot of you have been born in circumstances better than your parents. You have a relative sense of abundance. You have all of that. You have things easy. And yet you have absolutely no clue who you are, who you want to be, how you are going to be judged, what is work, you don't know anything. Nothing is, and so you have to invent everything. This is a generation that needs to invent concepts before living them. The idea of identity you have to invent before having an identity. What is identity in today's age? Right? What is a good career in today's age? I knew what a good career was. Everybody knew what a good career was. Whether you could get it or I knew that doing an MBA from IIM Ahmedabad was very good. I knew that doing arts in my college was very bad. Particularly if you're studying in a place like Baroda. I knew that, right? It was not a mystery to me. Today, you can drop out of Harvard, and that may be the best decision you've taken in your life. And your benchmarks, nothing you do is good enough, because at 19, somebody has already made, $20 billion. So I do think that, this is a generation that, and look at relationships, There was a time when the relationship in my time was कि वो लड़की मेरी वाली है, मेरे को खिड़की से शायद देखती है. That person may not know that I'm alive. मगर वो मेरी वाली थी. वो मेरी वाली, उसकी शादी होगी, उसके बच्चे हो गए, all of that, but and वो दूसरे अपनी भाभी को देखा, meaning क्या भाभी has no idea who you are, That was romance in our times, right? That was pretty much kind of, what is the best you could aspire to. That was a relationship. Today, it's like you're a situationship, and it is so incredibly complex. And that's why you find when young people in relationships speak to each other, they are their co-therapists more than they are actually partners or anything else. They actually speak in therapy. This is toxic. This is a red flag. You look at the language around relationship today. It is a language of therapy, right? And so I just find that I have a lot of time for the challenges this generation faces. And therefore, when it comes to workplace, this is where we hear most of these kind of snotty comments about a generation that doesn't want to work, or is not committed, or is very flighty. And it's from a certain frame, that is true. I mean, those characterizations make sense if you look at it from a certain other frame. But from a certain other frame, what they are exposing are the lies and the hypocrisies that are present in our working culture. I mean, if I was to look at how organizations treat human beings, it is such a blatantly exploitative. We've been hypnotized. Firstly, this idea of the white collar and the manager is such a fabulous invention. We are workers, we are labor, but we have imagined ourselves to be something much more. We still get paid, we still don't own anything, we still can be fired at will. Just because we have an office and we have a laptop does not make us anything more than labor. We are labor, right? But that fact is obscured by the fact that by the trappings. We feel that, as that we are something more than mere workers. And so therefore, if you have to work through the night, that's how it is, because we are responsible people, we are managers, we are leaders. So there's this whole mythology that gets created around the workplace, and which we are all gleefully kind of buying into, and kind of deluding ourselves in some ways into believing that is the truth. But your multinational company can suffer a reverse in Venezuela, and 20% of the workforce is fired in India. You have nothing to do with that. You have nothing. You have no relationship to, you're doing your job fabulously, and that's the way it is. So I'm just saying that the hypocrisies in life, I think, are getting exposed because of the fact that they have to invent things, so they look at it with new eyes and saying, hello, this is work, it's a contract. So what do you mean I have to work longer? If you have to work longer, pay me for that. I mean, you're not going to pay me once month more because I have a need, and you say, look, this month I have a need, can you pay me 20% more? Are you going to pay me that? So then how do you expect me to work 20% more because you have a need, right? I mean, it's a perfectly legitimate question. But so therefore I do think that the Gen Z is I think a generation that is, and yet it's not as if it knows the answers. So it's not as if it is, it is coming at you with saying, I know the answer and I want to reform you. I don't know the answer. I'm also finding out. So I think this is it's I think, I hope it's but given the speed at which technology is changing, I suspect every generation is going to be bewildered about something new. Instead of reaching, at least I don't see that happening, changing in the short run. But I do think that there's a generation that is with trying to come to terms with a completely new world. And I think they are doing as well as they can. Yes, they are struggling. But I think other generations, I think, should learn from what they are going through rather than sit and pass judgment.
Yeah. And I guess the mental health that is being talked about is because of the pressures to make sense of everything that's going on. And it's not just social media. I mean, of course, it's adding to the pressure, but everything is fluid and you've got to make sense of everything. And you cannot turn to your parents for anything because, and so you're
clueless.
Peers for help, like you said. And hence, is there something that the brands have to keep in mind when they're talking to them, rather than just trying to have, use influencers and build some superficial relationships? Do you think brands can partner with Gen Z for actual real change? Because they have the energy, they have the enthusiasm, they want that change, but it's like nobody really talks to them in their language or builds that trust. Because like you said, it's such a difficult world, and they do care about sustainability. And I know your daughter has a startup, which has an apparel which is more sustainable. And I was listening to one conversation where you were saying, from my lens, I was like, what is this? Why do you want to do it? And you were amazed at what she was already capable of and what she thought. And of course, you helped her so much. So sustainability, positive change in that zone, do you think there is a way to harness brand as an idea? Can it be more impactful with Gen Z?
I think, in fact, for Gen Z, the brand as an idea is, in fact, the only thing that is impactful, in a sense. What I mean by that is the fact that, what you're buying into, what you're looking for are worldviews that you can relate to. What you're looking for is something that you can actually anchor yourself to, something that you helps you make sense of all the changes that you're going through. So you're looking, that's what Gen Z is looking for, right? The fact that what in this world, which is so fluid. So what seems real, what seems true, and what can I therefore, express myself through, because I need means of self-expression. I have so many different sides to me, competing sides, conflicting sides, evolving sides. And for each of them, I need a vocabulary, I need a language of expression, right? So, I mean, some of the responsibility is myself, how I fashion my persona, but I need help. Fashion is a way of expressing, beauty is a way of expressing what I read, what I buy, what I consume. So, consumption becomes a very, very important part of my ability to express myself, my individuality, my uniqueness, my multifacetedness. I want to express all of this, and brands are therefore vehicles for doing so. But I also distrust, brands that are generic, that are trying to sell me something. I'm suspicious, I'm cynical, and so therefore I need something that I can believe in. And once I believe in something, I can invest a lot more in it, in that relationship, than traditional consumers have, who have looked to brands essentially for risk minimization. I'm not looking to brand for risk minimization. I'm willing to take risks. I'm looking to brands for identification, for belonging, for alignment. And so that's a fundamental shift in the relationship between brands and people. And I think for this generation, therefore, that sense of knowing where you come from, what you believe in, how can you help me express who I am, these become very important. And part of it is sustainability, but it's not just sustainability. It is anything. It is anything. It doesn't have to be. You don't have to be, noble uh, to play a role with Gen Z. You don't have to say that I believe in something lofty. And I think that's a mistake that of the last few years, which has, where every brand now adopts some, something alternative sexuality or something, that is not. I think that is a very narrow reading of the need. The need is authenticity is not just about nobility and altruism. It is about many things. It is about, and one of them is of course that. One of them is of course that. But I would say that the larger truth is the fact that it is about self-expression. Authentic self-expression is what that people are looking at. How can brands help do that by being, authentic themselves?
And authentic itself takes on such a powerful meaning, Santosh, because of whatever you explained, yeah, you just kind of brought out the mindset that a Gen Z has. And in that sense, the identity almost becomes like a protective shield, like a filter through which I'm processing the world. Is this me? Is this not me? And hence, authenticity is so powerful because, I mean, I'm unprotected otherwise. I mean, if I'm not being me, and hence it's so important for the brand to be true to themselves, and not take on a persona to get them, because that will never work. So I have a 17-year-old son, Santosh. He's just Gen Z, and he's educating me all the time. I gladly, willingly, learn. Like he's my mentor for so many things, and I'm his mentor for certain things. But it's amazing. I am amazed at this generation. They find their path well in this chaos. Okay. Now, so we have okay. How about we talk about so there is technology and how it is changing us. And then there is AI and how it's changing us. And technology has been creeping up now and then. How the design also is one subset of it. Our homes are getting reshaped. How OTT, what it is doing to us, mobile, what it is doing to us. So there is this whole one space, and then there is AI, which is moving at such a fast speed that every time you're scrolling, you're like, okay, now you can do this, now you can do that, and there are some people just making sense of what it means, and by then new stuff has come. So it's mind-boggling. I want you to talk about the fundamental changes that are happening in our society, and you can take any thread and, we will get into segues, how these fundamental shifts that are happening. I mean, Gen Z is a manifestation actually of, where the world is headed. It's alive and speaking to us. But there's so many other changes that we just doing it without realizing or thinking about it. So fundamental changes that are happening in a society, and meaning making was one of the things that you always talk about. Maybe you would like to talk through that.
So I think one of the things, to recognize about technology is the fact that it is an agent of change, which is a very sly agent of change. It's a very, in the sense, what I mean by that is there are some agents of change that are very obvious, right? So when we watch Hollywood films, the fact that they are a different culture, they have cultural influence, when with their brands that are multinational brands, we recognize the fact that here's a cultural, outsider coming in and influencing us. And so therefore there are nations that, are guard against the fact that, I don't want to be led too much by the outside influence, or I want to guard against excessive westernization, etc. The thing about technology is that, it doesn't come cloaked in any ideology. It is neutral, right? On the face of it, technology is technology. Everybody uses it. It's for your good. But the fact of the matter is that technology is ideological in the sense that technology changes us in fundamental ways without our being aware of it. Let's take the most simple example of the mobile phone. The mobile phone fundamentally tells us that you are important. Because in an earlier time, when you had a phone at home, people called the place. Now they call the person. Right? That's a fundamental thing. Everybody is somebody in the mobile phone. There's a unique number that you have. You are important enough to be reached personally. Right? You have an address in the new world. Everybody has, by having a mobile phone, you are a dot, a pixel in the world where you exist. It's an affirmation that I exist. And it sounds very abstract, but that's the truth. More than that, as you now look at it at a gestural level, what I do with a mobile phone. Here's a bunch of people who were making very few decisions in their life. They were, in India, there was this masses and the classes, as we very crudely have put it, where you are part of an undifferentiated group of people who take public transport, who are, whose individuality is not recognized in many spheres, right? And now you have a device which dotes on you, which in a sense jumps to every command of yours, where you are liking, disliking, choosing. You can dismiss something important like, and every mobile phone is like a story, a novel, which is of my relationship with the universe. It's a journal that is a unique script which scripts my relationship with the universe. Every mobile phone is different. There is no two mobile phones which will be the same, right? And what you think about it, that's such an amazing power that individuals have. This idea that, I have a unique relationship with everybody, with the world. And that can be anonymous. That is only me. And it is such an individualizing technology. And so it reshapes us and not just that. Take the touch screen. If I had to choose a metaphor for today's times, I would choose the touch screen. Because what it is saying is that every part of me is responsive. I touch, something has to happen. On demand. It is on the individual demands a response, and technology delivers. And it is like that. It is instant. It is transporting from one place to another. It is insistent. It is. And so the idea that's why you see these photographs of infants also looking at a magazine ad and we want everything to be a screen. We want everything to respond, right? And so what it creates this feeling is I'm important. I'm central to the world. World must jump to my command. These are all things that are being fed to us without our being aware of. Similarly, and well-documented idea of, attention spans narrowing because of this, social media and the effects. And there's a whole bunch of effects that are being produced by technology. Not all of them are, bad. There are some very good effects also. But technology is changing human beings at a fundamental level. And it is changing us in ways, I would argue, and in fact, Jonathan Haidt has this book called The Age of Anxiety, and he makes an interesting point that you look at 2012 onward, something happened. Young women's mental health fell off a cliff. And he has a chart that shows, how that happened. And he says 2012 is when the smartphone, Facebook and all started doing, it became possible for you, the likes became public. And it became, the fact that you were in a marketplace of the self became not, smartphones came before that, just a change in the algorithm of social media. He correlates that with a dramatic change in the mental health of particularly young women. Right. So it's interesting that you can see the cause and effect with technology being so profound. And so, sorry, yeah.
It's because they are now open to scrutiny.
Yes. Open to scrutiny, having the anxiety of self-presentation at all the time, feeling, and because of the fact that at a certain age, that cohort, the whole Mean Girls, there's the whole, that mythology that you see, of how difficult in that sense, that period is. This is speculation. It's a hypothesis. We don't know for sure, but because this is just a correlation, right? So I would hesitate to sort of say that is like the sacred truth. But I think, because we also it correlates with what we see around us, right? So I'm just saying, but it's what is interesting is how small differences and small changes in technology can magnify so much. And that's not new. I forget who it was who talked about how the horseshoe in an ancient time changed the geopolitics of Europe, because horses suddenly could travel much longer distances, did not need to rest as much, and therefore an army could cover much more distance because of the invention of the horseshoe, right? So, the idea that seemingly insignificant technological changes can result in cascading changes of a much higher order is not a new idea, but we are seeing it happen on a daily basis now. So I think that's why technology, I think, and what it is reshaping, therefore, a sense of who we are. And if I just pull back a little, my kind of mental model of technology has always intrigued me as to what is technology. And my definition of technology is the fact that historically, technology was the overflow from the mind to the body. What I mean by that is the fact that our bodies are inept. They can do very few things. They can walk at a certain pace. They can lift a certain amount of things. There is a certain amount of physical limitations. But our minds are boundless. We can travel at the speed of light. We can have 20 thoughts in our mind. Our imagination is boundless, but the imagination is trapped in this inept body. The body can do very little. So the technology is the mind's contribution to the body historically. Say, okay, let me help you out. I'll give you make some tools. Use fire to cook. Build a little machine to help you do this. So the mind has been actually getting out and getting impatient with the body and saying, look, you're stupid, inept thing. Here's some help. Right. And that's what technology has been successively. The mind in the initial phases helping the body. You created language so that now your ideas don't get trapped. So a whole bunch of things if you look at the history of technology. And so you came to, then your mind started saying, okay, you need energy so then you created the idea of electricity, and over a period of the mind saying that, okay, now mind needs, why should I stop at the body? The mind needs help itself. And so computers are about the mind helping minds helping minds. And today we are actually saying, why can't I take the mind outside the body so that it can actually, why does it need to be trapped in the body at all? And that's what we are doing. And then we are re-implanting that mind back into the body through variables. So if you look at technology, it seems like a disorganized story, but actually there's a pattern in how technology has moved. Technology has successively, it says, the gap between what you want and what you can have, I will continue to narrow. Your mind wants things, your body can't have them. I will keep narrowing. Now we are getting to a point where with AI, the mind actually can reside outside the body. And if we first made a body redundant, now we are making a mind redundant, which is exactly what, in a sense, AI is doing. So it's quite fascinating if you think of technology in a pulled out kind of a way.
It is scary too.
It's terrifying.
We are becoming hyper individualized. I mean, imagine us as a collective society. And I've heard you talk about how, there were these, the mother-in-laws took it on themselves to keep the joint family together. And, it's now I can have compassion with all of that, but I couldn't then. So, uh, as you were talking, I'm digressing a little, Santosh, but, I was reading about Hofstede and how he and his team went about deciding values of the world. So, like how many studies have happened and how much data they have correlated with to see that there are patterns that, restraint versus indulgence. And I know you've talked about Hofstede a lot. So, and he, every time he talks about it, says that as the shift happens, the whole world shifts. The shift is always relative. The differences, across the latitude, longitude, as he deduced, they stay similar. And when I was thinking about Gen Z, I said, now that has changed. That should change not by the same logic, because the values were passed on by the parents, and now it's like up for grabs. You want to be more indulgent, restrained. You want to more individualistic, collective. You're choosing as per the categories, as per your identity. It's just like so. What I want to know is, what is our sense of who are we becoming? Where are we headed? Because there are so many points of view. This is good for us. This is bad for us. This empowers us. This constricting us. So there's limitless possibility. No. We are not even using our bodies, and we have to relearn the basics. There's just so much talk about. What is your sense of who we are becoming as people? You want to talk about India or the world, whichever way. And what do we need to retain and protect?
So I think, in a way, I am very sympathetic to the kind of McLuhan-esque kind of view, of the fact that, uh, every time media changes, the world changes. And in a sense, media is, I see it as a sort of standard for technology. The world, everything changes. Everything changes when media changes, right? I mean, the written word giving way to the visual word and the audiovisual word, the world changed. The internet coming in, the world changed. And each of the times there are certain characteristics embedded in the medium that are invisible, but that bring about change. I think the case with the internet is the fact that, what is fascinating in the digital world is that it's almost like inbuilt in the structure of the internet are these oppositions. It is very deep. It is endlessly deep, but it is very shallow, right? At the same time, it's a very shallow engagement. Twitter is very shallow. At the same time, the rabbit holes galore. I mean, you can lose yourself in any subject on the internet, right? It allows you, so it's polarizing on the one hand, and it allows you to just drift off into your own little world and be lost to everybody else at the same time. It is anonymous, and yet it is the best identity building machine that is available. But it is, if you choose to be anonymous, it is totally anonymous, right? So, and there are a whole bunch. So if you think about it, you'll find many such, and so what is happening is it is creating a whole bunch of people who are similarly being pulled apart in different directions. And you are seeing this, that is happening, which is why you find such polarization in society today. I think so. What we are becoming, and the other thing it is doing is that it is kind of re-tribalizing us. What is happening? Re-tribalizing us in the sense that, look, the fundamental truth is that never in the history of humanity have all people had access to broadcast media. Broadcast media has been one of the most tightly controlled assets in the world over history. Very few people have the right to be heard by other people. You earn the right, you're born into that right, and therefore till the digital world, you look at a newspaper, it has one small strip for letters to the editor. Three people every day can articulate their view. Right? That's was the idea of a two-way interactive world. That is a limit to which, and on television, though, the studio audience, with its role, that is that is a limited extent to which you could have a point of view. Otherwise, the speakers speak, the listeners listen. But what happens when the speakers speak is that you create this layer of so-called experts, authorities. So you read. So what was our epistemic pool? Where did we draw knowledge from? We draw knowledge from books, we draw knowledge from experts, we draw knowledge from newspaper columns, from magazines. That was our episteme. Bunch of people who are allegedly knowledgeable. So it created an elitism of a sort, but it also created a certain authority structure based on verifiability, based on somebody having earned that to a certain extent. And so there is a certain, credibility and certification that was part of that world. What has happened now is that everybody is a broadcaster. So the authority of the expert has just vanished. Who is an expert? Nobody is an expert. Everybody is an expert. Everybody, I have done research. So I know vaccines don't work, and nobody can prove it otherwise, right? So now, and also what has happened with that is the basest emotions, the most primitive instincts are now, because I have instant access, I feel like this right now, I tweet it out. And when I tweet it out, I find that there are 100,000 people, idiots like me, who feel the same way. So they say, "Oh wow, that's amazing," etc. And so here I get legitimized. So my shitty opinion or whatever, if it is a shitty opinion, it gets like, So what we are doing is we are building a culture, and the epistemic pool that we have today, where we draw our knowledge from, is tweets. It's reels. It is coming from people like us. So at one level, this is a great democratization that has happened. You've destroyed elitism. You've destroyed a few bunch of people, ruling you forever. But on the other hand, what you've replaced it with is a discourse that very often comes from the gutters, that very often comes from the most primitive part of who we are. That is, and so therefore we go back into a tribal time, distrust strangers. You have your own rituals, have your own beliefs, have your own, which are held together by the fact that people share them rather than any external validation. If so many people feel this way, it must be right, rather than, there is a way to validate this. So I think we are becoming more and more tribal, more and more primal in some ways. Just as we have the ability to become much more rarefied. So, it is a confusing time, right? It is a confusing time. That's why I'm saying it's not Gen Z alone. It's a confusing time. We are becoming, and what we are seeing in the world. So you see the Donald Trumps of the world, and across the world, we are seeing this upsurge of a certain kind of a political stream, which are all going back into a more primitive sense. What is wrong if we are strong? If we are strong, we must leverage it. This idea that, we should be good to everybody else in the world. Who says that, So it's every person for himself or herself. It is that sense that, strength is right. Majorities are by definition, they have the right to rule. You're going back into ideas like that. It is possible it's a passing phase. It's possible that, we are coming to, we have suddenly been given this new freedom. And that's the thing what technology does, right? Every technological change needs societal change to regulate it. But technological change happens very fast, and societal change happens very slow. Right. So what happens is that we are always lagging behind. And when technology changes as quickly as it does now, we don't have coping social mechanisms. We don't know how to contain this. We don't know how to direct this or channelize this. So we are just subjecting ourselves to it. Now, AI, for instance, we know AI can be fatal for society. But we know it. And yet nobody has acted to do anything about it. By the time we regulate AI, it will be too late. By the time we figure out what it can do, it will be too late. It is possibly be too late. So I think this is the challenge that society is facing today, that we are being kind of becoming kind of versions of ourselves that we don't have control over, which we don't feel that we don't have control, but we don't have control over. And we do not have the self-awareness enough to do something about it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, not the most uplifting conversation.
I want this pause to be. I want this pause to be because, like they say that, there's a lot is talked about speed, even in marketing, and we'll get into AI and specific effects for the marketing and the branding world. But, it's if you listen to, people like you, people who are really kind of having a calibrator, inner compass, and they're kind of measuring and telling us the direction you're headed, the direction you're going, you know. Nobody is doing that, Isn't the direction the most important thing? Because your life, anyways, is going to go. I mean, it's every day is going. But where are you headed? And are you, because it's like you said, it's so easy to become primal and to succumb to it. It's so easy to get to your baser instinct. It's, I mean, you pick up a mobile and you wanted to text, and you 15 minutes have gone into scrolling, and maybe half an hour, 1 hour. I mean, you just have to delete those apps from your mobile, because otherwise they are making sure that they grab you. They just grab you any point in time, any frame of mind, and can be so destructive, as we have seen. So, because you talked about self-awareness, I mean, that's what it does. You keep checking on the direction you are headed and what you're becoming each day, and that beautifully, I just want myself to, kind of remember this whole tribalism and the rituals. That's what it's trying to do. Just get a hold of yourself. Just get a hold of yourself, because we are acquiring desires. We are acquiring, I mean, we just not ourselves. Most of the times we are just hijacked and captivated by whosoever knows a better algorithm. And of course, we have Gen Z, okay, to worry about. Okay. They are sorted. They are worrying about us. Okay. So AI, because like you said, AI, I love the pause that happened after
that. Okay. That is bleak, bleak, bleak.
Nice of you to
Where do
say.
we go from
Okay,
here?
okay. Hold on. That was not the intention. Okay, so you just that's needed for everyone to know, like there, that's on the wall, it's written. Okay, so AI and cultural shifts. We are talking about what is its impact on creativity, originality, and how we make meaning.
Yeah.
And first of all, Santosh, you want to start with how we make meaning?
That's a subject by itself. See, I think this is the thing. We are meaning making machines, right?
Yeah.
So we're making meaning through everything. So we fundamentally are, and I think to me that is the most fascinating thing about the work, the world that we do, the work that we do. When we work with brands, we work with culture. They're all brands are meaning making devices, right? Marketing is fundamentally about making meaning. That's fundamentally the surplus. The brand surplus is nothing but a meaning surplus, right? You are associating meaning with something that is not necessarily inherent. We make meaning through what is thrown at us, the smallest thing. There is a certain historical, there is a meaning that is either embedded in its form, in its structure, in its context. So for instance, we will decode a limp handshake versus a strong hand. Now if you look at what is limpness and what is strength, where does limpness come from? You could say it is a phallic idea, limpness versus strength, right? Is it a phallic idea? Yeah. Right? Where does it come from? Why is limp weak
Yeah,
and why is potence?
yeah.
Right? So I mean, there is, so again, so every idea, it's so for instance, in a photograph, people at the center are the most important. Where does that come from? Where does centrality become a sign of importance? Right? Where do we, because core in a flower, the core, there is an idea of the core, right? Everything. I mean, you look at meaning making. Why does a a teacup and saucer versus a mug, if you serve the same thing, versus a cooler,
Everything
why do they mean?
changes.
Why does a cigar, which is also a tobacco delivery kind of a vehicle, and a cigarette versus a BD versus a pipe, Why they do a right? So the thing is and the so as a whole, it's a complex subject. It could be from a whole bunch of places, right? So I think meaning, but we are making meaning all the time. And the other thing that we don't recognize is that how we are constructing meaning, and how meaning is constructed in our world. And my favorite example is the courtroom. The courtroom. If you look at the courtroom, right, and if I was to come at it with completely new eyes, it is a bizarre spectacle. It's a B grade costume drama.
Not C grade. Okay.
Not C grade, not C grade, B grade. Because there are people wearing robes. In some cases, they wear wigs. There is a set, actually a set. There is a set with a judge sitting on top. There are you cut hair mein yahan, and there are two. There is symmetry. People speak in this weird ass kind of a language, right? You say your honor or me lord, as we say in Hindi films. It's like a play. It's like a bad school production. And what are we adjudicating there? The most important issues of our world are being adjudicated through life and death, literally. Why do we need a costume drama to do this? Why? I mean, I would argue that because when human beings get to decide on other human beings and they play God, you have to earn. You have to create a meaning system which feels like it has the authority. You have to earn that authority. You have to create something so detached from real life that it feels like a theater which is given the permission to make those decisions. And you see costumes everywhere play that. Police, army, the costume of a nurse, the costume of a doctor, they are all segregation authority creating devices. They are devices that say, this is not normal human activity. These are people entrusted and given something much more than what is normal. So I think so. What I want to say that, and everywhere, religion is how our meaning. You look at everything, we are constructing meaning everywhere. So I think meaning making and meaning construction is I think something that we do all the time. And a great way to look at the world is to look at it through the lens of how meaning is being constructed here.
Yes. So with so a lot of our cultural tenets and concepts around hard work, effort are being challenged. So now you want to write an article. I mean, lesser mortals like me. I mean, you just speak it in the voice to Chat GPT, have some thoughts, give them a tone, and they'll churn out something. And so even Seth Godin says that effort is the aura that you give to your work. That's what you have in your control. And of course, we have been the hardworking, emerging, culture that we've always been. So, what is happening to our notions of with AI, and what's going to happen to hard work, to effort, to creativity, to originality?
No, I think it is I think upending everything in a sense, right? Because as you say, effort to be us is the hallmark of what we can do. That's the best we can do. We struggle with something. There is a whole process, and that process is what gives a sense of accomplishment. So today, what happens with AI is that if you give it, like, you can ask it to write a presentation, and it'll give you a perfectly credible presentation. And what happens is that when you look at it, you don't own it, and you don't really, it's your relationship. It is of awe to a certain extent, but also it is superficial. Because you don't own that, right? You don't. But if you have to give it off to somebody and say, "Oh, this is my work," and it'll pass muster. And I think more than with time, more than pass muster. I mean, it'll get better and better at what it does. So I think there is, and not just in terms of effort, in terms of time, it just totally kind of screws with our idea of time. Because our notion of something is that you have to take time, it takes day, and here you give it and it. So for instance, if you give it a book to read and say, summarize this book, it starts instantly. It's a 800-page book, and you upload the book, and in the next 5 seconds it is giving you, and it's like, this is like devilry, this is like magic. I mean, this is like sorcery, right? So it really messes with our conception of. And then what it does is that it forces us to ask in some ways, what is the real value of human output? I mean, what we thought was real value, particularly when it comes to, say, creativity, and we say originality. What is originality? For instance, it says that, to argue that creativity comes from nowhere is obviously not true. It comes from somewhere. We don't dig into it, but fundamentally, creativity is recombinant. It takes things from the other things and it kind of puts them together in a new way. It uses new slants on old things. But every new thing in the world is created from old things. We are incapable of creating new things. The world cannot create new. All substance comes from other substance. Right? No idea can come from nowhere, because then we would not understand it, because it would have to use terms that are familiar to us, right? So basically it is exposing the fact that what you call originality, is it original? But I think what it cannot do is that originality for us comes from lived experience. So when you say an artist is representing his or her time, his or her ethos, his or her lived experiences, it is not just the painting that is important. The painting is a result of a set of experiences that is important. So now it is almost like we need to start valuing things in a new way if we have to deal with technology. Already, for instance, it's look at how we now have started valuing food. The test of food earlier was taste. Today, the test of good food is it authentic ingredients? Do they have a story? Are we reviving a particular kind of millet that has lost? Taste is still important. I mean, you're not going to taste something which is utterly ghastly, but what you're buying for and what you're paying for and what you're interested in is the humanity of it, right? I think increasingly the meaning of creativity becomes more exacting, becomes more embodied. You may find tomorrow that the most valued creative experiences are the ones that are created in front of your eyes, for instance, because that will be a measure of authenticity. Performance, you perform creativity, right? You don't create things, but you perform things. That may be a new measure that you will find, because it is lost, it is ephemeral. You perform it and it's gone, right? It is, and that performance is key, not the output. Because it is a question, therefore, value always will go from one place to another. Right? The handmade become valuable in a world of automation. Right? The handmade was otherwise the handmade. Everything was handmade. There was no specific value to the handmade. So I think value. It's not as if the meaning of creativity, our interest in creativity is not going to go away. What we call creative will change. What we value will change. Right? So you may have totally different modes of value creation, right? So I think we are in a stage of transition there, and we don't know what it will look like, but we don't know it'll have to change, because old ways of what is good quality, what is good thinking, all of them are going to become, commoditized, and so it pushes human beings to a much more difficult kind of a place where you are challenged much more at one level. And I'll switch gears to talk about another thing. The other thing that is likely to happen is that we are going to be defined more and more as consumers. And that doesn't seem to be very new, because you say, well, we already are, aren't we? But I think in a much, much more dramatic way. I think my belief is that consumption is going to be the largest profession in the world. We already are seeing consumption as a profession. All the influencers are professional consumers. They're consuming so that we can consume. Mm-hmm. Right? They're telling us how to consume in a variety of ways. Tomorrow, what is going to happen is that we may get paid for being consumed. I'll get paid for the time I spend on a site. I will get paid for if I recommend that to somebody. So because the problem is that, in any economic system, there has to be a resource redistribution method. Today, that is based on work. I work in your factory, you pay me money, I buy things. I work in your software company, I do stuff for you, which is profitable for you. You give me money, I buy things. The economy grows. Every year I make a little more money, every year I spend a little more. Now, if I'm losing jobs, AI is replacing me, robotics is replacing me, where do I get money? Either I get money through UBI kind of a thing, basic income for everybody, which is a kind of dole, which is not a particularly rational system, or I say, okay, I redefine work. My simple example of this is that, look at begging. Right. For most people, begging is unproductive activity. Yeah, begging, to my mind, begging is highly productive activity. What is the difference between begging and being a liftman? For instance, the liftman presses a button, you ask him to. We think that is gainfully employed. Right. Beggar, if you look at physical amount of work, the beggar walks much more. The beggar has to use psychological things to get money out of you. How is that different from anything else? He's serving a need of yours to feel altruistic and to feel good about yourself and to feel superior to other people. That person is working and working in a hard situation. So my point is, value is arbitrary. The point I'm actually making about begging or liftman, why do hedge fund people make shitloads of money by doing nothing, adding no value to humanity? They make the most amount of money because they're closest to money. So I'm just saying, today we imagine a world which has a certain value attribution method. Tomorrow's world, and I am not necessarily saying it is going to be consumption, I'm just saying it will be different. Value attribution will be different. Meaning of art will be different. Meaning of originality will be different. It may be more challenging. We may struggle more to do it, but it isn't as if when one thing dies, nothing else is born in its place. Something else is born in its place. And something else will have to be born in its place if we want to keep things going. So we will think of those things as we go forward, but they could look very different from what they are. And I think that's what the AI is going to do. It is going to change the world because our fundamental concepts have to change. And we are going to invent new ways of evaluating things. What we call things is going to change. Everything is going to change.
And somewhere you said more human, because the technology and the machine becomes a stark. Is it a possibility that we actually become more human or value the humanity even more? Because that is something that cannot be appropriated by the machine. The experience that is leading to the art, the journey that led to the work outcome, the pain, which is typically a source of, all songs, so if that...
I think so. I think always what is scarce is what becomes valuable, right? Always what is not the norm, in that sense, what is not easily available or what is not, the generic becomes valuable. So I do think humanity, but I think we have to find, it's easy to say that, but we are talking about, billions of people and how do you create a system that creates meaning and value for that many people, right? So I think that's the reason why I think something like consumption could be that meaning making thing, simply because it's very easy to do, right? It is something that is accessible to everybody in their own way, right? But otherwise that is the challenge. I'm not, concepts will evolve, but how do they include people? How do they become inclusive? I think is the challenge that I think is going to be a big systemic challenge to crack. How do you make sure that that it feeds everybody, that it gives meaning in life to everybody, that it makes everybody's life feel like it is worth something? That's really the what you talk about meaning making. The challenge is in creating systems that are successful at meaning making, at creating rewarding sense of meaning. Because if only a few people make all the money, and then how does the world function? The billionaires can also eat only twice a day, right, or thrice a day. Fundamentally, they can only wear so many clothes, and there's only so much that wealth that is concentrated can do. So how do you create a system that is much more equitable and allows other people also? So I think the big challenge, I think, is going to be that.
It's so strange and yet reassuring that in all this chaos, what we and the coming generation has started valuing is authenticity, is okay, build trust with me, have transparency with me, be real, which is, so much chaos, so much chaos. You said it out, and I was like, oh my God, what are we going to do? I'm worried for the entire humanity. And what is getting valued, like you rightly said, the rare bits, is which nobody is actually promoting. Nobody is really, I mean, they're trying to get it right. They're struggling, every brand, every company. And when they do, I mean, it's rewarded. So I'm hopeful, Santosh.
Yeah. So let me not say anything more because, on this subject, at least, I think it's a good time to be hopeful. I think it's
No. If it's our imagination, if it's our imagination that now is the world is relying on, then there's one scenario that I'm going to start imagining, which is
I think I also, I mean, I'm not a particularly pessimistic. I'm more.
No, not at all. You were not being pessimistic. You were spelling it out, which is all of that is happening. Absolutely. It's worrisome and it's scary. It's happening.
I think every time the world shifts in a fundamental way, it is scary. So far, we've done okay for ourselves, and in a manner of speaking. I think the world has got better. I do think, in spite of how it feels, if you were to look in the fullness of time, I think that is what it is. But I think this change is fundamental because, so far, all that when technology has changed, it has been an enabler. This is the first time where it is actually taking over things that we really value ourselves for, and which we think is the essence of being human. So now we have to find a new essence of being human, which I think is a philosophical challenge also.
And protect what we value, but what we cannot let technology take over. I don't know if that's possible, but yeah, I mean, that's just one voice here. Okay. So, Santosh, what do you think about account planning? I'll tell you, a friend of mine is doing a PhD on reinventing account planning. And, he interviewed me as well. And he's talking to clients and creatives, and he's actually going to have a thesis. And I, of course, wished him luck. But do you think there is a need to reinvent account planning? Because, you deal with, in your Think9 technologies, you've seen how brands were being built then. And now, there's so many startups, digital brands, completely different models, D2C. And, the way they function, how much of communication they need. Yes, there are first principles and we are still human and none of that changes. But content has become so important. And I know you don't like this word. It's an abuse. So there's so much of content. Everything is a content. Of course, it is content. But yes, the content planning to engage and, the pillars, brand pillars, and then, of course, just digital first. And, the creative is saying what support we are getting from strategists is limited because I need to think differently for different kind of communication that's required. And the client is saying these people take so much time and, every day I have to be out there and, face the client. So the consumer. So do you think the way, and there's a whole lot of pressure. I mean, like we're talking about the society and the world, of course, there would be, I mean, because
Absolutely.
brands, at Mica, they used to tell us are like people, less complex, but they're like people. And they have a role that they're playing in your life and you build a relationship and all of that. And of course, meaning making. So what do you think about account planning and its future?
So I want to say it almost two opposite things in a way, but but I think they actually converge. One is to say that, of course, some things are timeless. Of course they are. I mean, there's no question. But what is timeless? I would like to go down, a notch. I think what is timeless is the fact that if you're looking at reality, looking at a structural kind of a analysis of reality. So I'm not starting with the consumer. I'm not starting with the brand. I'm going into saying that understand what shapes reality, what shapes today, what shapes tomorrow, what are the factors. So if technology, then what is technology? Go back to the absolute building blocks of anything. If you're working on lipsticks, then what is lipstick? what is they do, what is identity, what is color, you know, what place does do lips occupy in our body? What do lips mean, right? It requires, once you do so, if when people say first principles, they often mean, oh, brand is the same, or consumers never change, or motivations are the same. I'm going below that. I'm saying first principles are the methodology, the method of seeing the world in a certain way, of saying, what is origin, what is original, where do things begin. So if you go back, then AI is also where to advise. AI begin, where you say digital, where does digital begin? What is digital? Then what happens is that it doesn't matter how reality changes, how fast it changes. So that way of seeing the world allows you to go anywhere into anything, and provide a certain framework for being able to see the world, strategize, etc. So at one level, I would say, if that is what you define as first principles, that is timeless. On the other hand, I would say the opposite, that the worst thing you can do is to be complacent and say the more things change, the more they remain the same, which I hear people say. Yeah, what is there? It's all the same. We were earlier consumer now. Now there are just new means, there's new media, there is no, but essentially it's the same. Storytelling will always remain the same. Truths will. So to me, that is delusion. So what I'm saying, if you define timeless in a genuinely timeless way, yes. I mean, a genuinely structural way, yes. But otherwise, I think the position to say that it's still more of the same, I think is a very dangerous, misleading position. Lots have changed in the way you practice it, but there are fundamental. If you go back really to the core in terms of how you analyze things, how you look at things, that is by definition it is timeless. So with the right definition of what is first principles, there is a timelessness to it.
You've said that definitely how we are doing things is changing, and what we value is changing. So, this is something that one can't have shortcuts or bypass this thinking. If we just step back, and you might have answered it, indirectly, but I still want you to, share with our audience what you think in terms of brands and how we relate to brands.
Mhm.
Do you think that could change? Like Byron Sharp says, and I honestly want to differ, that you can't really have brand love. It's just about accessibility, mental access, and physical access, and that's that. So if I say that, okay, hard work is not valuable to me, so definitely you cannot be a brand that says that it will help you work harder. Okay, it will help you work smarter. So, I mean, the kind of value will change.
Mm-hmm.
But how much a brand means to me, a certain brand, will that shift? And will there be gradations according to categories or something?
Yeah, so I think it is true that in general today, if you were to look at the world, most brands don't have that relationship, and therefore what Byron Sharp says, mental availability, physical availability, whatever he says, I can understand where he's coming from, saying that brands may kid themselves that they have this deep reservoir of meaning for consumers. But that's not really true. It's a shallow transactional relationship. If I'm think of you at the right time, if you're available to me when I'm think of you, that's the most that you can do. So that's one view. But I think that ignores the fact that the world is changing in a profound way, and part of that profound change is what the potential is for brands, because people are looking for things to believe in a world where you are running out of things to believe in. The strange thing is that in a certain sense, the market has the chance to be more authentic. It is, in a sense, it is easier to believe in advertising today than it is to believe in journalism. Right. Which is an amazing thing to say, if you were saying 15 years ago. Right. So that's, so you have to acknowledge that shift. You have to acknowledge the shift that all those things that we believed in, that we took for granted were the truth, are the things we are questioning, rightly or wrongly. We are questioning today. And of course, there is nothing wrong about questioning, say, television journalism today. You would have to be like a blithering idiot, if you were to think otherwise. You would have to be an absolute total idiot, right? I mean, it is junk, and that's polite. So I'm just saying that so the world has changed. So yes, brands, if you build them the conventional way, are then to pretend that there is some very deep relationship is wrong. But that is because you're building them wrong. If you today, what the consumer is seeking is a connection, is for things to believe in. If you come from a real place, if you have a worldview that is real, that resonates with a person, the need is to find things to express themselves authentically through. If you are providing that, if you are not, maybe some podcast is providing that. Podcast, maybe some influencer is providing that. So it's not as if brands are the only place where you will find that, but the search is real. Brands, if they step up and they fill that void, that's an opportunity. Then it is not just mental and physical availability. Then it is much more. Then it's a deeper relationship. But that the ball is in the brand's court to actually take advantage of that.
So, coming back to account planning in agencies, because we will get to your journey and your school of planning. You started a school by yourself, but we'll get to that. In between, there is a tiny topic about change, which I came to know that fascinates you. So I said, okay, as Santosh muses, we'll observe. Do you think account planning in agencies needs a repositioning? Because it's not really getting that kind of a value by any of the stakeholders.
This is a problem that account planning has always had. So this is not a new question. From the time I joined the industry, this was a question. Nobody really needs her, nobody loves her, and my answer to that even then and even now is whining, is the fact that you will be needed, you have to make your need, you have to add value where it is needed. You can't determine, that this is where I'll add value when nobody sees value there. You can only add value where value is recognized, right? And to me, therefore, I always tell my team that never come to me to say that I was excluded from this meeting or that, nobody informed me that this happened. If you were adding value, they would have informed. If you were adding value in their terms, maybe, but they would have asked. So to me, it is planning's responsibility to create value for planning. I mean, you can't lay that creative doesn't value me, then it's your problem. Client doesn't value you, your problem. So I would say that the responsibility for, it's not just planning, any function that bemoans lack of value, the answer is to look inwards. So that's one. In our case, we created value. I mean, if I was to say, it was by saying, okay, India is at I joined advertising in 1986, right? And India was going through, the first flush of liberalization, 91. It went through the real one, the push. And we became, therefore, intermediaries. We became, the whole lot of brands coming in saying, I want to deal with India. And they came with some preconceived notions. They didn't have a clue. We were intermediaries. We were interpreting the brands for India and India for them. But we found that, what do we know about India? We are, most of us come from little elite kind of cocoons where we know squat about India, right? So then it became almost like a lifelong journey to say, and to me, the ambition, the best way to think about a subject like India as big and complex is that you have to understand all of it. You can't say, I will understand automobiles, because that means nothing. If you want to understand a bit of it, you have to understand all of it, which is a daunting as hell idea, but there is no way around. You have to understand caste system, you have to understand everything. You have to understand how the pieces interlock. And you may have a lousy understanding, and that understanding in India will never be complete. It's a doomed project. I mean, you will never succeed in a real sense, but you will go bit by bit. So then your knowledge is additive. Your knowledge is, adds up to a coherent, at least you are trying to create a coherent picture. India will never allow you to create a coherent picture, but it is trying to do that, right? So I think that became the role that we said, okay, if that is the role that we can play, nobody else is playing that. That is value of a kind that cannot be found anywhere. There are no academics who are dealing with, everyday India with the granularity and the speed with which planning can do it. Planning has access across categories. So, the idea that I can study everything is not fanciful, because, you actually have access to a large number of categories. Planning sits on this cusp between people and ideas. Brands are ideas. So, a lipstick brand is about the notion of beauty or notion of identity. So the notion of beauty and people, how do they interact, right? So it allows you actually a huge canvas to explore these area and create original insights. You say that nobody else is doing it. I'm not going to rehash insights. I'm not just going to be a reportage machine where I go to consumers, they say some things and I kind of spit it out. I'm going to be interpretive. I'm going to be analytical. I'm not going to be afraid of my subjectivity to put things together in a framework. I will theorize. I will create original perspectives. I could be wrong. I could be shallow, right? But I will not shy away from taking that responsibility onto myself. Once you do that, you find that you have an audience, you have relevance, you have and not that every time it works. There are enough people who don't. Screw them. I mean, the point is and the other thing that goes along with that is that I've always maintained that planning needs to be indulgent, and it needs to be occasionally. It has to be self-indulgent, because we don't know where value comes from. When people ask you, oh, how will this help you make a better ad, which I've been asked all the time. You are studying, we did a study looking at, looked at matrimonial ads over 40 years and looked at, a content analysis of how it has changed, or Hindi film lyrics, and we analyze key themes and saying, okay, over time, how has the treatment of themes changed? And we but very interesting, but how will it help me make a better ad? And I said, that's a stupid question to ask, because we don't know what will help you make a better ad, right? You don't know what will help you make a better ad. We don't know what insight will come from where. The idea that hairstyles were fixed and now hairstyles are changing, right? I mean, it's not some great observation, but the fact is that the insight came from something totally unrelated. So the idea is that planners need to have the freedom and need to earn and get the freedom to explore ideas simply because they are interesting, simply because they are happening. That, to me, that is the key. Because unless you do that, so the point is, in today's world now, for instance, what is the question that that the world is asking? How is technology going to change our lives? How is it going to make a difference? And the one thing I'll caution against is, what I see planning do is this very trendy kind of thing of only focusing on what is happening with Gen Z in a very narrow sphere. So a paddle is big very everywhere, and this, I mean, it is big nowhere. It is very small. It is actually tiny, right? I mean, and so when we talk about technology, don't limit yourself to what technology is doing in South Bombay or don't limit it to people like you understand. And that's very trendy. You can use a very trendy kind of a school of planning. Understanding has to be sociological, has to be anthropological, which I think is a more correct term. It has to be rooted in saying, how is it making a difference to people across the board? Even if your market is you're talking to a very niche audience, even so, to understand processes, you have to understand the entirety, and therefore, I do think that is a ready-made role for planning today. There's a ready-made role saying that the world is changing so fast. How do I make sense of it? How are people changing? How are forms changing? I find it striking, forget planning. I find it striking that advertising, which used to be the fount and source of creativity in India. So, for instance, outside cinema, if you want to say, okay, where is creative? Where are creative things happening? So, I remember when I was in advertising, the most creative things were happening in advertising. Many consumers used to tell us that actually watching advertising is more fun than watching serials. I mean, it's not, it was a, reasonably kind of a wide spread belief. Today, it's all the creative is coming. All creative energy is coming from independent sources, from individuals. It is coming on TikTok when it was there. It is coming on Reels. It is coming on YouTube. It is coming on nothing from advertising. Nothing from advertising. And here we are so-called creative industry. We are paid to be creative, and we are doing chicken shit work. I mean, there is such poor work. I mean, but I've seen in the last few months, I'm getting a little hope. I'm seeing some slightly more interesting work. But otherwise, the work in the last 4 or 5 years has been staggeringly ordinary. And how have we let go of the mantle of being producers of creative, right? Today, it is, and so, everybody is complicit, right? planning is complicit in it, creative is complicit in it, management is complicit in, everybody is complicit in the fact that we have been too timid. You have been afraid, and I will stop myself on this subject because I can go on to a very long rant on this, because I think the ultimate culprit is creative awards. If there is creative awards, if there is something that has destroyed this industry, it is the idea of creative awards. It is a absolutely inward looking. It is a totally, it is self-pleasuring, of a kind which has no external value. I mean, you really are kidding yourself if you believe I won 3 awards in something there in Spikes and thank you and nobody gives a shit. Nobody, your eyes glaze over. And in an earlier time, at least they used to share the work. Now nobody shares work. So you have actually no idea what one. We just know that some great, glorious, creative person has won this award. Who cares? And what it does is that it creates an artificial goal, which has nothing to do with market. It has not, and I'm not a good even effectiveness awards, I'm not a great fan. It has awards itself. Why are you awarding yourself? And you don't allow external bodies to award you. It's, film directors don't award film directors. Right? I mean, people award, here you will not allow, you are creating advertising for people.
Yeah.
But you don't allow the people for whom you create your work to judge you. This is the little cozy club. And I will not use the language what I want to do, pleasuring each other, let's say. In repeatedly, 25 times a year, half the time creative directors are going off on jury duty. And apart from that, I mean, just the fact that you have created completely a metric that is complete, and this whole idea that furthering the craft and create is all nonsense. Because nobody sees the craft, right? Except you guys. Right? We have not furthered the craft. You've let go of creative mantle. The whole world has come in and overtaken you. What are you doing with that craft that you've allegedly so painstakingly built? So I will now stop, because otherwise it is something really, it gets my goat, because I just find it so ridiculous that an industry can be so short-sighted. And it is falling apart in so many ways. Talent is at an all-time low. As a client, when I deal with agencies, I am so uninspired because they're stuck in old models. Here there are, influencers producing, 10 reels in a week. And here to get, one similar product out, you will take 3 months and, 2 crore rupees. Which world do you live in? Right? Currency has changed. Everything has changed. And I just find that the advertising industry, and sorry, we were talking about planning. So let me come back to planning now. The rant over.
No, it's good to see strong feelings about this, because that was the reason people entered the industry. Passion and creativity. From IMA, you came here to the advertising industry because there was something about it that you wanted to explore that stimulated you, and to not get that gratification is a huge betrayal, is a sense of betrayal, like what happened. No, you got at your times, but
yeah, I got out at the right time, I have to say. But, so this is all secondhand kind of but yeah, but I do feel
one
that,
can imagine, right?
Yeah, I can, because I hear people say all the time, it's not what it used to be when you were around, or, not when I was around, but when in my time, let's say. And I'm just saying that, eventually all of us are responsible for our own miseries. I mean, we can locate it elsewhere, and of course it is true. I mean, the world is not as kind to a certain model as it was, but the responsibility is ours to change. And, you can't, bemoan that, and then insist on doing things the old way and then lament a new way. I mean, you can't. I mean, you have to find a bridge between that. And I think planning actually is to be honest, I find a much better kind of sense of planning. I don't really interact with agencies in that sense, and I don't really meet planners. But overall, the people I've met and all, I find are much more kind of a much broader thinking, are much more culturally attuned. So in fact, I have pretty good feeling about planning in that sense, in terms of the kind of people that I see, the kind of conversations that I see. I don't see the output necessarily that aligns with that, but that's because nowadays you don't see output at all. You don't see advertising. So, I mean, to some extent that is also responsible. But I certainly see a much more interesting bunch of people. There earlier you had to collect the right kind of people. That was very important because that didn't happen by default. And it was a very important part of building teams is to get people of that kind, to gather a team like that, right? Today, I think it's much easier to do that.
Okay. Santosh, you're making sure it ends on a positive note. Are you? I hope
I
not.
genuinely believe that. No, I'm not trying to. I have no great need to. I have no axe to grind on this one.
No,
I'm
no,
very
no,
happy
no.
to curse people, when I think they need to curse. But I genuinely feel, contrary to what a lot of pessimism on the subject, when I meet people from planning today, earlier, there was a very narrow view of planning. And I think to some extent, we kind of helped broaden that view. But I think today I definitely see a far more, much more people who are reading, people who are interested in things, people who can talk about different subjects, who tune into different things. And I'm not just saying it to sort of, make it positivize, the thing. I genuinely feel that there is a difference. There is a difference.
Great. I'm going to convey all of this, and I'll make sure that he gets this, my friend who's doing this PhD, because it's really heartwarming and so nicely you've put it out there that there is so much to understand. And, thank you for legitimizing self-indulgence in this, because, for an artist, like every artist, every author, they say that I wrote for myself. I mean, everything they create, they it has to work for you. Like when I'm doing this podcast, I do write initially, but then I'm like, now whatever is appealing to me takes over. So it has to work for you, especially if there is a creative aspect involved, and in context of what studies you will take up and what makes you curious. Go ahead and do that. That's a wonderful mantra. And India. So Santosh, you said you cannot understand one thing. When it comes to India, you have to understand everything. We are a horizontal existence, is it? I mean, you say it so simply, it's not easy, isn't it? You go with your all biases and preconceived notions, etc. So that is one thing. And the other is that how do we understand change in India? Because I was reading this Lilliput Land by Rama Bijapurkar, and she has this one chapter just on how to read change in India. And it is, she has 4 mental models. But just one of them, was basically that it's not molting, it's morphing. So at one point in time, across the country, you will see very traditional, somewhat traditional, little traditional, ultra modern. You will see all of it. And when India is going to adopt something new, whatever has been will also exist. It will just add. So no deity will be dropped.
Yes.
A new deity will be. So how does one read change in India for planners who still feel for this, or people who are just interested in understanding consumers? It could be on client side also. How should they read change in India?
So my way of saying this, and and Rama and I have had this discussion several times, is saying that in India, modernity is nothing but negotiated tradition. So it is always tradition that is negotiating with modernity, and traditional keeps expanding to include this. So the old expands to keep the new. But in India, there is a great need societally. We have a great need to kind of contrive a sense of continuity. And to me, that is the underlying need. The underlying need is that we are not a society that likes rupture. We are a society that likes continuity. And we make things continuous. Right. So the classic example is the arranged love marriage, right? Arranged marriage, love marriage, two polar opposites. Arranged love marriage, blur the lines, hybridize, right? So you always find that so food. So if you were to look at, say, food in India, how the new is adopted, it is always a combination of the familiar and the unfamiliar. It is a familiar taste, unfamiliar form, familiar form, unfamiliar taste. Right. So you can have a Shezwan paratha, and you will have a, whatever, the aloo tikki makalu burger, right? Tikki burger. Same. So the same principle is, how do you create a certain sense of continuity? And I think that's a very, very important lesson to learn. India, that's why it's the same thing about insiders bring about change. It's the same thought. The fact that you have to be within the culture. The culture will expand. Anything that is new in its pure form will be allowed to exist, but at the periphery. As it moves inwards, it must Indianize. There's an anthropologist, I forget her name, who said that, you can never talk about modernizing India without simultaneously talking about Indianizing modernity. Right. India transforms what it is transformed by. Right. So fundamentally, that is a two-way relationship. It's never a passive receiver. You are always a modifier. You're always, you lend to it, and you sort of, what you do is that you include it within your framework. So, I have several kind of examples that I keep quoting. Electric diya, for instance. You fundamentally are saying, okay, I want this diya that lasts all time. But kaun karega tel, wo chala jayega, ye wo diya lagaya. But shape it like a wick, the lamp. So that it fulfills that function, right? That ability for tradition to have that flexibility, which is what India gets its cultural power from, is this flexibility that allows tradition never to be broken by the new. We are never broken by the new. We accommodate it, we assign it a place. It's a culture that is skilled at doing it because it has absorbed. So, for instance, there is this apocryphal story told in, I think, a preface to one of Ashish Nandi's book. It says that, when the Christian missionaries went to the Aztecs and they invaded the Aztecs, the Aztec priests were given a choice: convert to Christianity or die. And the Aztec priests chose death, which was lauded by everybody, saying, brave people. Even the missionaries, Christians said, wow, what self-belief. And he said that had the same thing happened to India, in India, not only would the Hindu priests have quickly, transformed into, and converted to Christianity, they had also composed a few hymns to praise Christ. No problem. But in a few years' time, their version of Christianity would be revealed to be a minor variation of Hinduism. And that thought, and this is what you see Christian caste churches in Kerala. You see lower caste churches and upper caste churches. You see, so many people from other religions talking about they were Brahmins earlier before they converted. You carry caste with you, even in religions that don't have caste. So it's very interesting how the Indian ability to manage change, and I think it's a huge. I mean, you can keep talking about it, but it is a truly unique kind of an ability to absorb change, to manage it without running away from change.
Rapid fire.
Okay.
You cannot take time to answer. You cannot elaborate. Otherwise, I will shoot. Are we ready?
Yep, let's go.
Mother's best advice.
Don't listen to your father.
What would you do on Mars for fun?
Sleep.
As for your wife, your most often used phrase.
No.
One thing no one knows about you.
I'm very boring.
A book you'd like to gift to all your friends, cannot be your own.
Mythologies by Roland Barthes.
What would you tell your 18-year-old self?
Relax.
Santosh, if you had to share your talent with us.
It is not a talent. It is a curse. But the only thing I can share that is remotely interesting is that I wake up every morning with a C-grade Hindi film song in my head. So, for instance, this morning it was this song called, which I don't know if you've heard, called Na Baba, Pichwade Buddha Khasta, which I think is so brilliant at one level. कि पिछवाड़े बुड्ढा क्यों खास रहा था और खास क्यों रहा था, and why is there a song about it? I mean, these are things that, I woke up and I stayed awake, because it seemed to fascinate. It is so.
Why there is a song about is the question I am stuck on.
Na baba. And the next song, the line, Pichwade Buddha Khasta.
Very evocative.
I know. It is strangely evocative and strangely kind of riveting.
You can almost hear the sound also.
I know. So,
what's something new happening in your life right now?
There's a podcast that I'm on that seems to be very long.
We'll edit that out. What is your favorite childhood memory?
Being in a township, with huge mounds of sand and jumping off them.
Okay. If you were to devote the rest of your life to philanthropy, what cause would you choose?
Helping disabled people.
Your greatest joy?
My children, my daughters.
What's a lesson that took you a long time to learn?
Nothing really matters.
What's next?
Age. Even more age.
Oh. What is your jagged edge?
I make faces at myself when I'm in front of the mirror. No, I would say it is actually my lifelong quest is to not take myself seriously.
You're succeeding. And you did so well.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, this is a wrap up now. Santosh, do you want to say anything about how people can reach out to you? Any book that's coming? Any book that's just published?
Yeah. So I have a book coming, which is, an update. In a sense, I did Mother Pious Lady was my first book, which was published in 2010, which was largely a collection of my writing. This is another collection of my writing, but it actually covers essentially the writing that is distilled is looking at India in the post-mobile phone world. So it's called so far, I mean, let's see, hope it's called Memes for Mummy Ji. And it basically deals with change. So it, like the last book, it is a kind of it's not a coherent. It's essays that are put together. So that's and you can reach me at it's there in my column santosh365@gmail.com. Always happy to. I love the detail and the depth of the show. I really like that. I think it's very well researched. I think it's and it's fun. It's a conversation that you want to have. It's not a chore. It's not something where you have to. It's a flowing conversation, which the kind that I enjoy very much. So there's a deep interest in the subject, and so which helps. So I think I have actually absolutely loved being on this, and you are the reason for it, just Ravi. So you need to take a bow. I think it was a conversation that I enjoyed a lot, and I would absolutely urge everyone to subscribe to it. And I will begin by doing that myself.
Thank you so much, Santosh. It's been an absolute pleasure. After David Acker's interview, it was your interview which opened my mind. It's like the people that when you get to know them, you want to know more of them. That kind of a feeling I was getting, and I was amazed. Thank you so much for taking time.